This is a production of Cornell University.
Thank you very much for that overly generous introduction, Margaret. And I wanted to say I'm super excited to talk to you today. I want to say thank you, first of all, to Lou and Kelly for organizing my schedule and making the arrangements, and everybody else who puts on these seminars and makes it possible to share ideas with the rest of the world. I really, as I was saying, am very excited about this talk because I feel like hunger in Africa, malnutrition in parts of Africa and the rest of the world really is one of the most pressing issues of our day. And that makes it important. But what makes it more exciting is that I believe we can now solve these problems. I look at the UN Development Goals, number 2 is ending hunger, basically by 2030. We could do it. And we could do it using maybe not just exactly the kind of things I'm talking about today, but many of them. And it's a shame that there's not more money being put into that. The battle is not won by a long shot. And so for anybody contemplating a career in plant breeding, I'm not saying that you're too late. There's a lot to be done still, but we do have some good notions about how to end hunger in parts of the world that really can't produce enough food at present time. So let's dive in. But first, I want to acknowledge my co-authors, Isufu Kapran and Irene Mugi, who you see there on the slides. Irene Mugi is Senior Program Officer with Seed Systems Group, where I live in Nairobi, Kenya. And Dr. Isufu Kapran is a sorghum breeder, and he leads our program in West Africa. We have a regional office in Lome. So first slide, start with some data. It's always good to do that. By the way, this will be the least scientific seminar given probably this decade here at Cornell. So bear with me. But I did want to show some trends that I think are pretty interesting. And these show the correlation between the supply of improved seeds, specifically maize seed, in Uganda and Kenya over a period of about 15 years, and then looked at what happened with maize yields in those countries over the same amount of time. And I think you can see that the correlation is not perfect, but it's pretty good. And anytime you can get data at a national level in Africa, which show a trend, you're in a pretty fortunate situation because data collection really isn't that good. So when it shows up on FAO data sites, you feel like you've done something. Now, I always use this slide when I'm talking to agricultural ministers and leaders in other countries that we work in now, because it for me was a real point in time when I learned that here in the United States, for a long time, we struggled with maize yields as well. And if you convert these yields, I think this data is gathered by Purdue University, from 1886 right up until the mid-1930s, our maize yields were stuck at about 1.5 metric tons per hectare. And 1.5 metric tons per hectare is a pretty good average yield for maize across the continent of Africa, wouldn't you say, Ed? Yeah. And then what happened here in the US was the introduction of hybrid maize, of course, originally double cross hybrids and then single crosses and then everything else that has come on since. So, it's not like we never had this problem. We did for a long time. And it wasn't like we weren't trying to solve it. We had developed the land-grant universities. They were breeding OPV maize during these times. There were names to those varieties. And we had developed the extension service. And still, we couldn't make yields budge until the advent of hybrid maize. So why focus on seed systems? Again, we feel like we have proof of concept now on the development of seed systems, which is really what this talk is about. By the way, the subtopic of the talk is the 10 things I wish I knew before I became a plant breeder. And we'll go through those too. And I hope you find those useful. But what we did at the end of a 15 years of work at Agra was to measure rice and maize yields in 10 countries where we had worked and where we could vouch for, the attribution issues, if anybody wanted to call us on it, and then compared those with 10 similar countries where we had never worked on seed systems. And you can see the big difference in trends in yields of those crops over that period, with up to at least 2020, those countries we had assisted advancing quite quickly. And in the rest of Africa, not much happening. So if you're in one of these countries in the orange line there, life is not good as a farmer. Population is growing. Africa's population is still growing at a steady clip. In the countries where we work, it's about 2.8 up to 3%. And some countries like Niger are over 5%. So, this is dwindling resources. This is subsistence agriculture. Subsistence agriculture is not sustainable. This is an urgent problem. And if you look at other authors, just to cite another publication that looks at yields on a big scale, and again, if you're in my field, you look for small positive signs, and that is a very nice positive upward trend. That had not happened for a long time in many of the countries where we worked. So again, addressing those people who may be interested in a career in plant breeding or international plant breeding and in international development in general, I would say reviewing what it took to be in a position to put money toward this work and do it in a practical way. We come to my first lesson, lesson number 1. International agriculture development is a fairly top-heavy field, and that's being a bit, politically correct, I think, if you read me correct or well. And farmers are often the last to benefit. There's a whole lot of money spent by rich countries on development, and the big D development absorbs a lot of resources. So you might expect that since the biggest problem that we're working on is farmer productivity at the basic level, that most of the money would be going there. But I'm using this graphic, and I don't have any data for this, I hope, and this is author's rant, not for citation, as you see at the bottom there. But, the amount of money that gets spent on administration and conferences, and then big rural development projects that honestly, I don't know where the money goes. I do know where the ag research money goes. And to be frank, I think we're still top heavy in terms of expenditure on research versus expenditure on delivery at the farmer level. I don't know why it is. A lot of donors, some governments don't really think that's an interesting problem. We happen to believe it's an interesting problem. The breeding work I'll talk about a lot today, that money has done some good, but we're still fighting for enough resources down at that bottom end of that funnel, which is where farmers actually get to benefit from what we're doing. I've just mentioned a lot of the breeding initiatives that I think, the donors have to be recognized for it. African governments as well. CIMMYT has done a great job with stress-tolerant maize. Some of you may be aware of that work. There are a lot of rice varieties available now from Africa Rice and Erie. A lot of the National Ag Research Institutes also have a number of good varieties. Some of them are willing to share. So there's exciting work that's been done in breeding. And so it's there. We have one breakthrough that we can really use to deliver benefits to farmers. But very few of those varieties have reached the farmers. There seems to be a cycle wherein money gets poured into research. People can spend their whole career, and that's kind of a cautionary tale for anybody, I think, studying plant breeding today, is that you need to be careful, because you could get into a career in research thinking that you're going to be able to help farmers, and you can get caught in that cycle of research and never get involved with actually helping farmers. And you wouldn't want to have that happen to you. So lesson number 2, it's a hungry world. It really is. I'm probably more convicted of this because we work in what we call the left behind countries, but I can tell you, I can assure you that there are millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of people yet in Africa that have never had the opportunity to grow a new variety, or are suffering from the effects of never having been able to grow an improved variety. And again, with population growth and reducing farm size, that's becoming a bigger problem every single day. So it's a matter of urgency for more people to become plant breeders. If you've chosen this field, congratulations. I really feel like there's so much you can do to make the world a better place. Just to cite a few examples, what we've seen in terms of breakthroughs over the past couple of decades, we have reliable resistance to RYMB and bacterial blight. And I see Susan McCooch in the audience. I won't go any further because I'll embarrass myself, but we have really great rice variety. We don't have enough. You know, I was just talking to some graduate students, and one of them comes from a highland region of India, another one comes from Nepal, and I'm asking, do you have any highland cold tolerant rice varieties that we could introduce into Madagascar? So we still need more. You know, resistance to maize streak virus, big breakthrough in breeding of maize, Tersicum leaf blight. These were diseases that killed maize in many countries, made it virtually impossible to grow maize productively in Uganda, for example, and large parts of Kenya, until people I know and work with, and even little old me, got busy and bred a new generation of hybrids resistant to foliar diseases. I was in northern Togo last week, and I'm afraid there may be a new strain of maize streak virus. So yeah, as Borlaug always said, the wolf is always at the door with these diseases, and we need to keep working on them. But there's been great resistance to anthracnose, grain molds, big problem in sorghum, head bug resistance as well. Cercospora leaf spot and rosette virus disease in groundnut, a big problem. We have resistant varieties now. They haven't reached farmers. ACMV, African cassava mosaic virus, a huge problem. Brown streak virus as well that broke out about 20 years ago in northern Mozambique and caused famine conditions in parts of Mozambique. We now have resistant varieties to those, thanks to some breeders I can mention. But yeah, beans has been a big success story. The advancement of foliar disease resistance, damping off shoot maggot in beans has been a big breakthrough. And downy mildew resistance and the development now of hybrid pearl millet is super exciting. I don't think any farmer has gotten hybrid pearl millet yet, but we're going to work on that. We've got it in test production plots in northern Ghana right now, and hopefully we'll start to get some seed out starting next year. Resistance to striga in cowpea and other foliar diseases. So if you want to know what this looks like on the ground, that's a land race of sorghum from the Sahelian region of Mali, and to the right, an intermediate Guinea caudatum hybrid of sorghum. The farmers said, oh, when they saw that, you know, they said, oh, but you've made a big mistake because we need the stalk to feed our animals. We said, well, just try the stalk and see how the animals like it. And they loved it because it's actually much more digestible, lower lignin contents in the stem. And it doesn't have to be so high lignin because it's not as tall. So that was a win. As I said, bean varieties that are extremely way better than the local varieties. That's a local bean variety in Rwanda. Can you imagine if you're a farmer growing that and you get a chance to grow this one? Well, yeah, the breeder did their job. There's David Okello in the background, standing there proudly surveying his improved groundnut variety here, where this farmer is standing, and that's the farmer's variety on the right. So as you can see, big differences. Again, this is bean in southern Sudan. We stole this one from Uganda and brought it across the border. That's the local variety. Any breeder can see the big differences that are available. Lesson number 3, though, is it's a lot easier to develop a new variety than it is to get the seed of that variety to scale. And I was once a neophyte in this field. After we had released our first series of maize hybrids in Western Kenya, I asked myself for the first time, what do we do now? I think it's time to get off the research station. And Gary Tennyson said, he was my boss at the Rockefeller Foundation. He said, no problem, Joe, jump on a plane. We'll go see the guys at Pioneer. And we went to Pioneer. You know, we signed all those non-disclosure forms, and we got inside the inner sanctum with the big shots. And I made a presentation like this to them. And I said, so I think you guys need to come into a big collaboration with the Rockefeller Foundation. And there was silence in the room that became a bit of a distraction until somebody said, well, I think we should take a bio break. And the guy met me in the hallway, and he said, Joe, nice presentation, great stuff you're doing out there. We're not coming. Yeah, there's more to that story than that, but that was the answer we got at that time. That was in about 2001. But on the way home, I had an idea, which I'll tell you about. But nobody ever tells you when you're a breeding student that you might have to look for your own funding. Maybe they tell you that, but did they talk to you about variety release committees and how political that can get? Do they tell you about anything like white labels, which is under the Plant Health Inspectorate? Did you ever think about how to scale up from breeder to foundation seed and transition that to certified seed growing? Who's going to train outgrowers for the seed? Do you even have a seed company interested? I'm always asking Cornell breeders, so what do you do after you release a new variety? They say, well, we license it to seed companies, you dope. But you know, from where I come from, and Ed knows where I'm talking about, it's a legitimate question. There may not be any seed company. Licensing agreements, field inspections, again, from Plant Health Inspectorate, who has the processing equipment to produce clean seed, and who's going to do the branding, packaging, and get this out to farmers. Those are the issues that a breeder faces when you're working in a developing country system. And so the real thing I came here to say is on this slide. And I say this to a lot of people, and then I say it only took us 30 years to figure this out. Basically, what you have is the public-private producer model for seed systems development, which needs to be done, I don't know where it doesn't need to be done, but we still need to put more resources behind this, either to increase productivity of a few main crops that are going to save lives, or to diversify seed supply systems so that people can also diversify their diets. But it starts with public breeding, and it shifts very quickly to seed companies. And the interaction between seed companies who are looking for a profit by producing and selling seed to smallholder farmers, and the scientists, there's magic there. I don't need to explain it. But then that all happens in isolation, and the farmers don't even know you're doing any of this. And that's a big problem, because the African landscape for agriculture is endless, and they're out there and they don't know. And so we needed a methodology for raising farmer awareness, and we have one now. It's called a village-based advisor, which is kind of like a volunteer health worker, and small packs. Don't do demos, don't do big demos at least. Don't put a lot of money into them, because you know the farmers will stand there politely and they'll say, thank you, can I get my Coke now? And then they'll go home and they won't adopt. It's sad, you know, because we did that for a long time. We don't do that anymore. The element of doubt, that was an agronomist who planted that field. My soil is poor. I live a long ways from here. That variety is not going to work on my farm. It's not because they're not interested. It's because of the doubt and the risk a small piece of land grown with a tiny amount of seed. That's 50 grams. That's 50 grams of a maize streak virus resistant hybrid variety. Do you see the quality of maize crop this woman has been growing? That's her. That's the farm. That's her maize crop. Yeah. It's a no-brainer. And then distribution through these mom and pop shops, small, just, a couple meters square of real estate where farmers can go and get their seed. Number 4, if you're thinking this is too daunting, I don't want to be a plant breeder anymore, or I think I'll go into biotech and study, I don't know, something really, esoteric. You're in luck because farmers will pull you through. And they do make this system work if they get half of a chance. How does it work? This woman grew a small pack of maize on her farm. And you can see she's not a young farmer. That's her landrace of maize. And this is in the southern highlands of Tanzania. And you see the size of that ear? What you don't see is that it's about 14 feet tall. And that's a Simit hybrid. It's got a number. And I asked her after we visited her plot, I said, well, what are you going to do now? This seed it's not free. That's a small pack, it's just a demo. She said, oh, no problem. I'll sell a goat. I'll sell some chickens. And then I thought, well, how is she going to know the name of the hybrid when she goes to buy it? And then she took me by the hand and she led me to her hut. And she said, that's the name of the hybrid. TZH. I can't read them. 5538. Yeah, it got released. It's available now. When I was first sent out by Rockefeller Foundation, the real agenda was to develop biotech. After a couple of years, I realized the real revolution in agriculture for the next 20 plus years was not going to be in biotech. I'm not dissing biotech. We need it. We need GM maize yesterday in Africa. That's a political question. But I could see that the revolution was really here. Farmer participatory breeding. Can you believe that for decades before this became the state of the art for developing new varieties, breeders weren't asking farmers their opinion. Now what you see here is amazing input from these brilliant bean farmers in Eastern Congo, and that's the bean breeder, and she's taking note of everything they say about the new varieties. And you can use gender-based selection methods now. This is under a farmer's field, and it really greatly reduces the likelihood of missing the target in terms of the new varieties. The 5th lesson is, again, nobody told me that I needed to work on my people skills. I was trying to become a plant person, and I am not a natural born manager by any means. I'm still learning, but I saw some incredibly adept people managers and nurturers. And when I went to Africa, who also happened to be plant breeders. And I took a note from how they operated and realized, they would never be successful at all if they didn't know how to work with teams. And I think this is a universal rule for plant breeders. If you're going to become a plant breeder at any level, you really need to be a good people manager as well. Go take a course. That's what I eventually did. They'll teach you everything you need to know. But here's some of the teams that we work with today. This is Sierra Leone, that's Madagascar. Monica Parker, famous potato scientist, anybody know her? This is northern Togo. That's John McRobert in a field in Burundi. That's my colleague Isufu in Guinea-Bissau, laying out some plots. And this is the other team from southern Togo. Lesson number 6, extremely important lesson. I want to say somehow, I'm a socialist at heart. That's the way I was born. And that's the way I will die. But I was born at the wrong time to be a practicing socialist. And so I want to say almost any breeder, if you don't want to work with private sector, forget ever achieving anything at any kind of scale. Because you need seed companies. They need you, but you need them just as much. And on that trip back from the United States, when we got shut down by Pioneer, did I mention the name of the company? Okay. They no longer exist. So the Corteva guys are great, and they're moving ahead. But the DuPont Pioneer marriage was a rocky one, I think, at that stage, and that's probably what influenced. But as I was steaming there in my plane seat, I looked out the window and I asked myself, you know, was there anything that we saw there in Johnston that looked all that complicated? That an African pioneer entrepreneur couldn't do? I mean, basically what I saw them doing was growing crops and putting them in seed and packages and selling them to farmers. And that really made all the difference, because I came back and I said, you know what? We don't need pioneer. We need African entrepreneurs to create their own pioneers. And Ed came on the scene at that point with just about the same modus operandi and started to train some of these pioneering seed companies. And you just, they're an amazing innovation. You can't imagine what this kind of an institution, this is Green Horizon Seed Company with a CEO in Juba, South Sudan. Because unlike MNC multinationals, these guys will sell any seed farmers need. The multinationals are just in it for the hybrid maize and eventually BT cotton probably. But right now it's just hybrid maize. And women tend to be really good at running these seed companies, go figure. And we see many of them succeeding against all odds. So just to name a few, Maslaha Seed Company in Nigeria. These are not shade tree seed companies. These are industrial, vertically integrated seed companies, producing all these different crops of seed, improved varieties. Tony Okello in Equator Seeds, Northern Uganda, same story. Felix of Peacock Seeds, he's also a parliamentarian sometimes, helps to get seed policies passed, but he's a seedsman, and that's his seed company producing hybrid maize seed and a couple other crops. Faso Kaba, that's Maimuna Koulibaly. She won the Africa Food Prize for her work as leader of Faso Kaba Seed Company. And she's tired now. You know, she created a seed company. It's successful. It's got it running. She handed it over to her daughter. So there's sustainability in this model as well. And eventually, thanks to the generosity of many people, the Gates Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, where I work, we went on to create about, well, many more than 114 seed companies. And we are still creating seed companies in Africa. And we need to keep going as fast as we can. So lesson number 7 is this face-to-face extension still matters. And with a nod to John Prine, also known as your new mobile phone app won't get you into heaven anymore. I've seen so many of these apps, and I know they're well intended. Farmers need proof of concept. There's a accountability issue here. It can't be boiled down to a 4-inch phone screen. And so that's where our friend Paul Seward came through for us, because he was trying to get farmers who had never used fertilizer to use fertilizer. And fertilizer is only sold at 50 kg bags. At some point, he decided, you know, I think the problem is the size of the bag. And so he made 1 kilo bags of fertilizer and immediately sold all the stock that they had. That was in Western Kenya, where farm size is very small and farmers are very poor. And that was pre-introduction of hybrid maize. So farmers were really poor and really hungry and couldn't afford anything, any kind of technology. Now go to Western Kenya and it's like, it's a true green revolution scene. But the idea here is that, as I've already said, let the farmer try. Don't make them take your word for it. Let them go home and take some of the seed with them. And instead of a few demos, we get hundreds of thousands of demos. This drives demand for improved seeds so that the seed companies can stay in business and achieve what they came to do. Agro dealers, really can't say enough of them. They didn't really fit into one of the lessons, but I think they're kind of a no-brainer. You don't buy your toothpaste from the toothpaste company, and farmers don't get their seed from seed companies. You've got to have distribution at scale. And I asked somebody recently, how many agro dealers do you suppose there are in Kenya? I had been hearing 3,000. And he said, no, the latest data show there's probably around 10,000. 10,000 agro dealers selling seed and other inputs in Kenya. Do you know how many there are in Togo? About 6. And they're all in the big cities, right? So farmers don't have access to seed. That's a big problem. But we're training agro dealers today. Well, last week, that's why I was in Togo. We're training agro dealers to become small scale vendors of improved seed. And today, right today, we're doing the same thing in Bukavu in Eastern Congo. Lesson number 8, the best seed systems are not private sector driven. I don't think we have the best seed system here in America. I absolutely believe in the public involvement, the vitality of the public sector in a seed supply system. And that means I believe in it for the whole food system and the whole agricultural system. First up, agriculture, and then the whole food system. Because just take the example of, the narrowing of our diets. When you just leave the decision-making up to the seed companies, and the big ones especially, they're only going to produce those crops that their shareholders want to see them produce. And there's no private seed company ever going to breed a new variety of Bambara groundnut. And it's a really important crop in Africa. So I'm just showing a few photos here. This is in Eritrea, and those are the wheat breeders who've done a fantastic job. Here, this is a private seed grower in Burundi producing in collaboration with the public breeder from Isabu. And that's the first hybrid maize seed production plot ever in Burundi. And that photo was taken just 2 weeks ago. So as a result of the work we've been doing over the past 25 years or so, there has been a lot of progress. And it's more than you can see in the data. On the ground, we see big changes in farmer productivity in these countries. And that's quite a number of countries. So, it's been exciting. But we need to turn the page because there's kind of the, mirror image or cis image of that map now on the other side of Africa. And that's composed of 21 countries where there really are no progress. There has been no progress. And that's about 370 million people, almost half the landmass of Africa. And 2.8% annual population growth. That means it's doubling every, 23 years or so. Probably around 40 million farm families don't have access to better technology, extremely high rates of absolute poverty, and around 38% average child malnutrition, stunting, and that's chronic malnutrition. So lesson number 9, I had a great conversation with the graduate students and asked them all, what's your minor? Because one of the best things about Cornell is they make you take a minor. And I want to take up an issue because I learned today in the discussion with the students that if you had a master's degree, you only have to take 1 minor. So why did you guys make me take 2 minors? Anyway, the point is there, and I benefited from both my minors, tropical soils and ag econ, by the way. But it helps you to be able to reason better, I think, when you go and meet with leaders who are unconvinced about the importance of this technology in their countries. Read outside your fields is the main lesson I think I learned here, and be able to make this case when the time comes. And the time did come because in 2019, Cornell and Seed Systems Group and a couple of brilliant guys from a consultancy called Satguru came together, and we fanned out across Africa, and we studied the seed systems in all these countries, and we put together a business plan. And it's only costs $95 million over 5 years. So if anybody knows any billionaires roaming around the streets of Ithaca, I'm here until Friday, and I've got a business plan I want to talk to them about. There's some of the outputs, our report card, if you will. Every nonprofit has to give their impact or their report card, and that's ours so far. You know, we've reached right around 7,000. These data are a little bit old. I think we're about 750,000 farmers reached so far in those countries, and produced about well, by the end of this year, it will be well over 5,000 metric tons of seed. And what we're also very proud of is the training. We do a lot of training, some of it degree-based, most of it short courses on everything from breeding to seed production to running an agri-dealer shop. Yeah, I just want to show some images of what this work looks like on the ground, and then I'll wrap up. But that's the work in Burundi, a very important producer of beans, an extremely impoverished country with farms, very small farm sizes, becoming hungrier by the day. Average child malnutrition over 50%. It's one of the highest in the world. And it's a green country. There's no reason they can't double the yields of all those crops and malnutrition in Burundi. Djibouti, strange country, very arid, no rain-fed agriculture, but they do grow forages and a bit of vegetables, and we're in there thanks to some funding from IFAD. DR Congo, very exciting country to work in. We're in on hybrid maize seed production and biofortified bean seed production. And Eritrea, wheat's the big crop there, teff as well. And the government had been importing about 3 containers per year of hybrid maize seed at great cost. And you know, Eritrea is a bit of a hermit kingdom. They don't have much forex to go around. And so they said, you can teach us how to produce hybrid maize? We said, yes, we can. And so now they're producing hybrid maize in Eritrea as well, and reducing their forex expenditures. Madagascar, can't say enough about how important the work is there. Extremely impoverished country. Also 45–50% child malnutrition, about 80% absolute poverty. And we need to work on all fronts in Madagascar. Very hard to raise money for that country. And lesson number 10 is probably a little bit unexpected, but I just wanted to point out, as breeders, we have to realize sometimes the local varieties are better. And that is the case in Somalia. We're working on sorghum there, and I really have serious doubts we're going to find anything better than the local variety. I think that's true for certain varieties of lowland, non-irrigated rice around Africa. Sometimes the local variety wins, and that's okay, you know. But do we stop there? No, we can also introduce other crops. And so, yeah, we continue to work in Somalia on other fronts. South Sudan, already mentioned, Senegal, Togo. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this wonderful talk. I'm wondering where improved varieties are coming from. Are your breeders working at public or government funded? Or are these coming from CGs? Where are you pulling this? And is there an effort to make a big consortium or hub that connects the knowledge?
It's a great idea, that last one. You know, if I was a little younger, I would tackle that. You know, just get these African governments sharing varieties is hugely powerful, and they don't realize that they should be doing it. But yeah, a lot of them come from the CG. A lot of them come from leading NARS. I can mention a few. Mali has extremely talented breeders. Uganda, just natural born breeders. Tanzania, yeah. So we move around. We work with those breeders who have good materials and are willing to share, which is not always the case with the CGIO. I don't want to get into it. So you got to have a plan B. Yeah, that's a big scramble. You know, where are we going to get that new rice variety for, Togo? Yes.
I just wanted to ask, what is something you've worked on that's been really frustrating or challenging? And also, what's a project that you've done or are doing that you're really excited about?
Okay, that's a couple of great questions. I would say sorghum really kind of beats me, It's a wonderful crop, and I wish it was easier to convince farmers to take an improved variety. But there's just something about that exquisite adaptation it's had the time to develop in certain ecologies, and you can show farmers everything, and they just not going there. The other question, where I'm most excited about working right now, I would say Guinea-Bissau. Because it's just one of those classically forgotten countries. And it rains in Guinea-Bissau and the soils are fine. And child malnutrition is extremely high. So they haven't done any variety testing since 1995, right? We can bring in varieties and we can get them into production. So yeah, it's very exciting. We're being funded there by the World Food Program. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you so much for Africa. I want to know, how would you describe African government's support towards initiatives? Do you find their policies like encouraging what you're doing, or you find them?
It's so schizophrenic. That's not the right term, but it's just case by case. We work in countries where I'm worried right now, where I'm standing, whether we're going to deliver. They are so on it and so in partnership with it. We work in some countries where they're like, go, yeah, whatever, have fun. We don't know why you're here. And that's frustrating. So it's just kind of everything in between. Generally speaking, I would say, if you can communicate well to the people on top, this is the importance of a participatory society. In a non-participatory society, sometimes it's only really one guy or a person taking all the decisions. And if you can't get to them, you're not going to get far. But if you can, then, I think we're living in a day and age when nobody gets to go out public and say, don't give my people new seed. I think that would not work, even in some of these totalitarian governments or countries. And so that's what makes it the right time, I think, to get in and actually do this work. Thank you.
It's a formal and informal flow of info back. Farmers look like if you send variety A and B, you've said about both of them. People, variety A ends up being sold to seed vendors and B absolutely fails. How do you figure out?
Yeah. It's messy. It often passes through agro dealers or the village-based advisors to the seed companies, but there's nobody in charge of that communication. I've got a team. We're about 30 people. I don't have somebody who's in charge of that, and so what you need is a volume of transaction. Enough people involved in the transaction so that at least one of them is going to say, hey, your variety sucks. and the seed company hears, or the breeders hear it, so that's the way I would say that's why we try to work at scale, because if you don't have a certain scale, then that critical communication just gets stifled, Yes.
You mentioned raising farmer awareness, village-based.
Yeah. Well, what I can tell you is what they are not is probably easier. They are not leader farmers. And we run into that kind of language everywhere. And a leader farmer tends to be the guy with a car, he's up there in the church, tends to be male, and just kind of the big guy. And that's absolutely death for promoting, new kind of controversial technologies, because nobody listens to them. They've always had all the advantages, and they associate you and your technology with the elite sector of society. So we go to a lot of pains, along with Paul Seward's team, the Farm Input Promotions group. And here I have to give a major shout out. That is not our intellectual property. They invented that lock, stock, and barrel. We actually have a non-disclosure agreement with that. So we're obliged to work in partnership with FIPS. FIPS is like literally, a sister organization to us, and they figured out that model. Who the VBA is someone who loves agriculture and is a good communicator. Those are if I could boil it down to two characteristics, that we're looking for, is somebody who really loves agriculture and would care enough to go around and talk to farmers about it.
So real quick, one question online, I think you may have indirectly answered it, but it was, how many people are employed by?
Full-time staff in our two offices, about 30. But we work through local national coordinators quite a bit. And so you can not double the number, but at least add another 15 or so people. And they do the day-to-day management of our work on the ground. They're part-time. And some of them are breeders working for the NARS who get an agreement from their institute to work with Seed Systems Group. And so they're on our business, yeah. We don't want to become big. We're not, we're fighting to stay small. Susan?
It seems like what you've done is you have this wonderful opportunity to kind of invite some of these leaders so they get to know each other across regions.
Yeah.
Is that part of the role that plays? Because I would think that the local networking is
Yeah.
very powerful in terms of a cohort of people facing common problems but distributed across.
Yeah. It's expensive. And we have an obligation to train the people who are doing the work, so that they understand what they're doing. We often neglect to invite important people. That's probably, partly my fault. But we're going to do that in November. We're actually going to bring all of our practitioners together in Nairobi in November and have one of those kind of sessions where we actually have a few important people in the room and they can talk to each other. So I'm excited. Yeah.
The reason I mentioned this is how important was the kind of training I received part of our network.
Okay.
And without that, honestly, without that network, my own cohort,
Yeah.
not the leaders of Rockefeller.
Oh, you're talking about a community of practitioners kind of thing. Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. No, that's the other objective of the November meeting. Is Eritreans are going to be talking to Togolese, and they're at the same stage of development of their seed system. Very exciting. Yeah. But they'll learn way more from each other than they will from us.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.